It's just old army stuff. Probably worth nothing. Take the whole box for $20. The woman who said it was maybe 32, 33, standing behind a folding table in her driveway in Picton, Ontario, on a grey Saturday morning in late September. She had the distracted look of someone managing too many things at once. A toddler on her hip, a phone buzzing in her back pocket, 3 other tables still to organise before noon. The box she was pointing at was cardboard, water-stained along one corner, sealed with a strip of packing tape that had gone yellow and brittle with age. Someone had written on the side in black marker, "Dad's stuff. Attic." The handwriting was careful, the kind of handwriting a man uses when he wants something to be found later. The man looking at the box was 74 years old. His name was Edwin Price. He wore a canvas jacket the colour of dried moss, work pants with a crease ironed into them that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with habit, and a pair of brown leather boots he had resoled twice in the last 15 years because they still fit, and because he saw no reason to throw out something that still did its job. His hair was white and kept short. His hands, which he held slightly away from his body, the way men do when they're being careful not to knock something over, were large and deliberate. Edwin Price did not come to estate sales looking for things to own. He came because his wife Lorraine had passed 3 years ago, and the house on Mill Pond Road outside Belleville had begun in her absence to feel less like a home and more like a waiting room. Saturday mornings he drove. He looked at other people's things laid out on lawns and tables, and felt, in a way he could not have explained to anyone, that he was paying a kind of attention the world generally forgot to pay. He had spent 31 years in the Canadian Army, including 2 rotations in Cyprus and 1 in Bosnia, and he knew something about what happened to a life's worth of objects when the person who owned them stopped being around to explain what they meant. He had not planned to stop at the sale on Whitmore Street. He'd seen the hand-lettered sign at the corner, "Estate sale, Saturday, 8 to 1, everything must go," and turned in the way a man turns toward a sound he's not sure he heard. The house was a red brick bungalow with a covered porch and a silver maple dropping leaves across the front walk. The woman with the toddler was the daughter-in-law, he'd find out later. The son, heavy-set, mid-30s, wearing a Raptors hoodie and the particular expression of a man counting down the hours until this is over, was hauling boxes out of the garage 2 at a time and stacking them without much ceremony on the grass. Edwin walked the table slowly, fishing tackle in a green metal box, a bread machine still in its original packaging, a set of encyclopedias from 1978, the spines faded to a uniform grey, 3 lacrosse trophies, junior division, 1981, 1982, 1983, all engraved to the same name, Owen H. Calloway. He paused at those. He stood looking at the name for a moment, then kept walking. He was passing the open garage when he saw the box. It was sitting on the floor just inside the door, not on a table, not labelled with a price sticker, just sitting there in the particular way of a thing that nobody has quite decided what to do with yet. Cardboard, as he'd noted. One corner soft from moisture. Dad's stuff, attic. Edwin stopped. He did not go toward it right away. He stood in the mouth of the garage and looked at it the way you look at something when you're not sure yet whether it's going to matter. What made him go over was not the box. It was the shape pressing against the inside of the cardboard on one end. Rectangular, flat, maybe 18 inches across, the kind of shape a shadow box makes when it has something mounted inside it. He crouched down. He looked at the box without touching it. Then he looked up at the son, who had come back from the lawn with empty hands and was drinking coffee from a Tim Hortons cup. "Excuse me," Edwin said. "This box, is it for sale?" The son glanced at it. "Oh, that one. Yeah, sure. $20 for the whole thing. It's just old army stuff from my grandfather's attic. We don't really know what half of it is." His wife, crossing behind him with the toddler, said, "My father-in-law keeps saying we should donate it somewhere, but nobody's gotten around to it. If you want it honestly, just take it. Save us a trip." Edwin looked at the box again. "All right if I open it? Just to have a look." The son shrugged. "Go ahead." Edwin sat back on his heels and opened the flaps. On top was a folded Canadian Forces dress uniform, green, with the rank insignia of a Master Corporal on the sleeve. Beneath that, a small Canadian flag, the kind given at repatriation ceremonies, folded into a triangle and wrapped in a plastic sleeve. Beneath that, a canvas pouch, the kind you have for field documents. And beneath all of that, wrapped in a piece of old grey wool blanket, was a shadow box. Edwin lifted it out carefully. He unwrapped it. He held it in both hands. The shadow box was made of dark wood, maybe 22 inches wide, with a glass front and a black velvet backing. Mounted on the velvet were 4 medals on their original ribbons. The first 3 he identified without difficulty: the Canadian Volunteer Service Medal, the 1939-1945 Star, the France and Germany Star. The fourth, positioned in the upper right corner slightly apart from the others, was a military medal with its crimson, dark blue and white ribbon. Edwin went still. He was not still the way a man goes still when he's surprised. He was still the way a man goes still when something he has known for a long time about the world turns out to be true in a way he wasn't expecting. He looked at the back of the chateau box. There was a paper label, handwritten, taped to the wood. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. The handwriting of someone very old, making sure a thing was recorded correctly. Sergeant Hugh Calloway, Royal Canadian Regiment, Sicily 1943. Ortona 1943. Rhineland 1945. Awarded Ortona December 20, 1943. Edwin read it twice. Then he read it a third time. He set the shadow box down on the garage floor very gently, with the care you give to something that has been mishandled enough already. He stood up. He turned around and looked at the son, who was scrolling through his phone. "Son," Edwin said. The son looked up. "What was your grandfather's name?" The son frowned. "Which one?" "My dad's dad? Owen Calloway." "Why?" Edwin was quiet for a moment. "And did Owen Calloway have a father who served in the Second World War?" The son's frown deepened. He looked over at his wife. She'd stopped moving. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I think so. My dad mentioned it once. Great-Grandpa Hugh, he called him, said he fought in Italy." "Why?" The wife had come closer now. The toddler shifted to her other hip. She was looking at the shadow box on the floor. Edwin said, "I need to sit down for a minute, if that's all right." The wife pulled a camp chair from against the garage wall and opened it for him. He sat. He held the shadow box across his knees. "There's a medal in here," he said. He pointed to the fourth medal, the one set slightly apart. "That's a military medal. It's not the same as a service medal. A service medal is given for being present. A military medal is given for doing something specific, something under fire that the army judged to be above what was required of a man. In the Second World War, the British and Canadian armies awarded roughly 15,000 of them across all theatres. Roughly 15,000, over 6 years across every front. That's not a common medal." The son had stopped scrolling. The wife had sat down on a plastic storage tote. Edwin looked at the label on the back of the box again. He said, "Ortona, December 20th, 1943. He said it quietly, to himself more than to them. Then he said it again, and this time there was something in his voice that the son would describe later to his father as sounding like the name of a place he'd been. Edwin Price had not been at Ortona. He was born in 1951, but he had studied it. Every officer in the Royal Canadian Regiment studied it. Ortona was 8 days of house-to-house fighting in a medieval Italian city in the winter of 1943, and it was one of the worst things the Canadian Army had ever been asked to do and one of the best things it had ever done. The Germans had turned every building into a fortification. The Canadians had gone room to room, floor to floor, blowing holes through shared walls with explosives rather than exposing themselves in the streets. They called it mouse-holing. It had no precedent and no manual. The men who figured it out did so under fire, with cold hands, in buildings that were trying to fall on them. A military medal awarded at Ortona on December 20th, 1943, meant that Sergeant Hugh Calloway had done something notable, remarkable, the citation language would say, on one of the hardest days of one of the hardest battles in Canadian military history, and his great-grandchildren were selling his medals for $20. Edwin did not say that last part out loud. He was a man who understood the difference between a judgment and a fact, and he understood that these people had not known. You could not hold someone responsible for not knowing a thing they had never been taught. Instead, he said, "Do you know what happened at Ortona?" The son shook his head. "Not really. Italy, right?" "World War II. Edwin nodded. He said, "Let me tell you a little bit about it, if you have 10 minutes. They had 10 minutes. They ended up standing there for 2 hours. He told them that the Battle of Ortona lasted from December 20th to December 28th, 1943, and that it was fought by the 1st Canadian Infantry Division against the German 1st Parachute Division, which was one of the best fighting units in the German army. He told them that the paratroopers had mined the streets, collapsed the buildings at the entry points, and set up machine gun positions at every corner. He told them that the Canadians had taken the town anyway, building by building, and that when it was over, the Germans had retreated and the town had been taken. and 1,375 Canadians had been killed or wounded in 8 days in a place the size of a small Ontario town. The son sat down on the grass. The wife had put the toddler down, and he was sitting in the driveway pulling at a shoelace, oblivious, the way small children are oblivious to everything except what is directly in front of them. Edwin said, "A military medal at Ortona. I don't know exactly what your great-grandfather did. The citation would tell you that. There will be a citation on file. I can help you find it if you want. But I can tell you that whatever it was seen by his commanding officer under fire, and the commanding officer decided it was worth the paperwork, and in the middle of that battle, with everything else happening, he wrote it up and submitted it, and the army agreed. That is not a small thing. That is a thing that was noticed and recorded and kept." The son had his elbows on his knees and was looking at the ground. His wife said very quietly, "He never talked about it. Mr. Calloway, my father-in-law, he used to say his grandfather didn't talk, ever, just worked, farmed, went to church, died in 1987. She paused. "We have a photograph of him somewhere, in the house. My father-in-law keeps it on the mantel, but nobody ever knew why the medals were in the attic." Edwin was quiet for a moment. Then he said something he had said before in other contexts about other men. The ones who saw the worst of it are usually the ones who said the least about it. "That's not a coincidence, that's the weight of it." The son looked up. He said, in a voice that was trying to be steady and not quite making it, "Sir, we didn't know any of this. My dad is in Trenton right now. He drove up yesterday for something else I don't even know, and he doesn't know we're selling any of this. He would." He stopped. He pressed his hand against his mouth for a second. "He would not have let us put this outside. He talks about Great-Grandpa Hugh. He just doesn't know the details." "None of us know the details," Edwin said. "Call your father." The son called his father. While he waited, Edwin carefully repacked the shadow box in the grey wool blanket. He set it back in the cardboard box. He folded the dress uniform over the top of it. He closed the flaps. He set the box on a table in the garage, away from the folding tables on the lawn, in a clear space where nothing else was crowding it. He did not put a price sticker on it. He did not need to. That box was not for sale, and everyone in the garage understood that now, though nobody had said so yet. The father, his name was Leonard Calloway, 61 years old, retired school principal, currently in a Best Western in Trenton because he'd driven up to help his son with the sale and had ended up staying an extra night. Arrived 45 minutes later in a silver Equinox, with the driver's seat pushed all the way back to accommodate a bad hip. He came around the corner of the house and stopped when he saw the small group standing in the garage, and his son stood up and said, "Dad, I need to show you something." Leonard Calloway stood in front of the shadow box for a long time without speaking. Edwin stood a few steps back, giving him room. The son and his wife stood behind him. The toddler had fallen asleep in the portable crib they'd moved into the garage from the house. Finally, Leonard said, "I knew he had medals. My mother told me once, years ago. She said they were in the attic and she didn't know what to do with them. She passed in 2002. I meant to go through the attic." He stopped. "I meant to go through it." Edwin said nothing. He had learned, in 31 years of service, and 23 since, that some silences are not waiting for a response. Leonard reached out and touched the glass of the shadow box with 2 fingers. He said, "The military medal. I didn't know he had that." Edwin said, "Do you know what it means?" Leonard shook his head. Edwin told him. He told him about Ortona. He told him about the mouse-holing, about the 8 days, about the 1st Parachute Division, and what it meant that the Canadians had gone through them. He told him that a military medal was not a campaign award but a personal one, and that someone had looked at what Hugh Calloway did on December 20th, 1943, in the middle of a battle for a stone city in Italy, and had decided it was worth recording in the permanent record of the Canadian Army. Leonard was crying by the time Edwin finished. Not loudly, just the quiet leaking of a man who has been holding a door shut for a long time and suddenly finds it open. He said, "Why didn't he tell us? He lived until 87. I was 24 when he died. I could have asked him." Edwin said, "The men who came back from Ortona didn't talk about it much. Some of them never talked about it at all. It wasn't that they were ashamed. It was that the words for it didn't exist in ordinary life. They went back to their farms and their jobs and their families, and they carried the whole thing inside them, and the carrying of it was private in a way that's very hard to explain to someone who wasn't there. Your great-grandfather came home and worked and raised children and went to church and died in 1987, and the medals went into the attic, and none of that means he wasn't what those medals say he was. It just means he was quiet about it. And there's a kind of honor in that too, even if it makes things harder for the people left behind. Leonard nodded. He was holding the shadow box now, both hands, the way a man holds a thing he doesn't intend to put down. He looked at Edwin and said, "Who are you?" Edwin said, "My name is Edwin Price. I'm retired Canadian Forces. I drove over from Belleville this morning because I saw a sign." Leonard said, "Did you serve?" Edwin said, "Yes. 31 years. Different conflicts, different era. Nothing like what your great-grandfather went through." Leonard said, "Don't say that." Edwin looked at him. Leonard said, "My father used to say that what he did wasn't like what the old men did, and Hugh Calloway probably said the same thing about the men who came before him. You all showed up. That's not nothing. They stood in the garage for a while after that, not talking much, the way men stand when everything important has already been said." By early afternoon, the estate sale had more or less stopped being a sale. Leonard's wife had driven up from Belleville when Leonard called her. A neighbour who had noticed the small gathering in the garage had come over and turned out to have a grandfather who'd served in the same division, different regiment, different battle, and stood looking at the shadow box with the expression of a man visiting a grave he hadn't known to look for. Edwin had not left. The son, whose name was Kyle, made coffee in the house and brought it out in actual mugs instead of paper cups. He sat beside Edwin on the camp chairs someone had set up along the garage wall, and for a while he just sat there, and then he said, "I feel like an idiot." Edwin said, "You weren't told." Kyle said, "We should have asked." "My dad knew there were medals. I knew there was an attic full of stuff. We never went looking." Edwin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the part you can fix now." Kyle looked at him. Edwin said, "Go find the citation. It'll be in the Library and Archives Canada database. The Second World War service records are digitized, mostly. Type in his name, his regiment, his rank. The citation for the military medal will be in there, and it will tell you exactly what he did on December 20th, 1943, in specific language. The army was very specific. Then you'll know, and when you know, you tell your kids. You tell them the specific thing, not just great-great-grandpa Hugh was in the war, but what he did, and where, and what the man standing next to him decided was worth writing down." Kyle nodded slowly. Edwin said, "And put the shadow box somewhere it can be seen." Kyle said, "Where is it going to go?" Edwin looked over at Leonard, who was standing near the garage door with his wife, the shadow box held against his chest. "It'll go somewhere," Edwin said. "That's Leonard's call. But it won't go back in the attic. That much I know." Leonard called Edwin 3 weeks later. He had found the citation in the Library and Archives Canada records. It had taken him 2 evenings and 1 phone call to a retired regimental archivist who had been enormously helpful and also extremely pleased that someone had finally called. The citation was 11 lines long. It described how on December 20th, 1943, during fighting in the northern quarter of Ortona, Sergeant Hugh Calloway's section had been pinned in a partially collapsed building by machine gun fire from an adjacent structure. The section's officer had been wounded and was unable to move. Sergeant Calloway had, on his own initiative, directed 2 men to lay down suppressing fire, while he and 1 other soldier worked their way through a shared interior wall using a pickaxe and a section of piping to create a breach. He had then led his section through the breach, outflanked the machine gun position, and neutralized it, allowing the section to withdraw the wounded officer and continue the advance. His actions were described in the citation as displaying exceptional resourcefulness and personal courage under sustained enemy fire. Leonard read Edwin the entire thing over the phone. When he finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said he used a pickaxe. "Yes," Edwin said, "he knocked a hole in a wall with a pickaxe to save his men. That's what the record says." Leonard said, "I'm going to learn that by heart. I'm going to learn it word for word, and I'm going to say it at Christmas, and I'm going to make my grandchildren say it back to me until they know it too." Edwin said, "That sounds about right." The shadow box now hangs in Leonard Calloway's living room in Belleville, above the mantel, beside a framed copy of the citation printed from the Library and Archives Canada website. Below the citation, on a small piece of cardstock in Leonard's own handwriting, are the words, "Sergeant Hugh Calloway, Royal Canadian Regiment. He used a pickaxe. He brought his men home." Kyle built a small display shelf below the shadow box and placed 3 things on it. One of the lacrosse trophies from the estate sale, because it turned out they were Hugh's son's trophies, and nobody had wanted to throw them out. just nobody had known where to put them. A photograph of Hugh Calloway taken in England in 1942, which Leonard's wife found in a shoebox under Leonard's mother's bed 2 decades after she'd been looking for it, and a small handwritten note from Kyle's daughter, who is 4 years old and cannot yet write her own name, but who pressed her handprint in blue paint onto a piece of paper, because Kyle told her it was for her great-great-great-grandpa, who was brave, and she understood brave because of the book about the bear. Edwin Price drives over to Belleville once in a while and has dinner with Leonard and his wife. They don't talk about the war much. They talk about the drive, about the weather, about the peculiar way the light falls across the Bay of Quinte in October, which is the same peculiar golden light it has always been. Once, Leonard asked Edwin if he ever thought about his own service, whether he wondered if anyone would find the record of it someday in an attic somewhere. Edwin thought about it for a while. Then he said, "I did my job. I came home. I know what it means that I came home. That's enough for me." Leonard said, "Hugh would have said the same thing," Edwin said. "I expect he would have." Outside, the maple tree in Leonard's backyard had gone fully orange and was dropping leaves across the grass in the particular unhurried way of trees that have been there longer than anything around them and expect to remain long after. The sky above it was the clear, hard blue of a Canadian October, the kind of blue that has no warmth in it but is beautiful anyway. The kind of blue that doesn't ask for your attention but gets it every time, because some things are just what they are, regardless of whether anyone is watching.